Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at a Portalcraft deck. It's a pretty standard Puppet Portal deck with incorporating, of course, Omen of Destruction, which is a pretty popular incorporation into these decks. Honestly, most of the time it's kind of your main win con section, outside of maybe Omen of Craving and I suppose Orcus as the other kind of win con, and Sylvia as a kind of ping to get there, but most of the time Destruction is kind of your big play and definitely a good focal point for the deck. It is also running the new Rinrika of Resistance, although I don't use it too often. It's definitely a support card. It's not something you're using actively to advance your board. It's more to secure your board and really stay stable. That's about all it's really for. Maybe you might get a couple of extra damage in with it, but that's really about it. So we're going to get right into this and check it out. So the current rotation meta is a little all over the place. Of course, Mysteria is still one of the most popular decks, but I have been seeing a little upsurge of Sword and Bloodcraft, at least in the last day or so. Although it's not a lot, I would say it's still making up some of the more minor of the majority. There's definitely a lot more Dragon and Rune than there is Blood or Sword, but they're making their rounds. Not too uncommon, especially since Sword isn't a bad use for a counter to most decks, so it's not surprising that we're seeing that come out a lot more. And of course I wanted to play something just different and off meta, and I thought Portal would give me that kind of fix for a little bit. And honestly, it wasn't that bad. It had a rough start getting off the ground, but once I adjusted to its playstyle a little bit, it was really performing quite nicely and really could not fault that at that point. So of course, I wanted to start off as well as I could. There's not too much I could do here. I kind of took advantage of Silver and then went for the Puppet, of course, to clean up the 3-1, leaving Sword with very little on board, which is the only thing I could really do. Kind of set up for my turn 4 play. This deck actually does favour a fair bit going second. Although going first definitely isn't bad for the deck, it's definitely just got a much better play on turn 4 when you can play the Evo with the Destruction. And having that extra Evo point really does help in this deck in particular. I don't get too many decks these days that can really take full advantage of going second, but I have found this Portal deck in particular is definitely one of them. Holy Bear Knight, definitely not a problem. We're setting ourselves up to go for a triple Omen of Destruction at this point, which is pretty decent considering spells and stuff obviously are very hard to remove these with outside of just straight up damage, so we don't need to really worry about too many cards at this point that it could actually remove us effectively. So there is Spartacus, meaning if they draw themselves out, they're still going to be able to win, so not too great if we ended up in a long drawn out matchup. Fortunately for us, we are looking at a much quicker one, having a very secure turn 6 board that isn't going to be super easy to clear, although I could definitely see them clearing 1 or 2, so not going to be impossible, just difficult for the opponent here. While we set up for a nice Glissini, I don't know, I normally just say Omen of Craving, much easier. Either way, it's going to be a very solid turn 7 play, pretty much regardless of what our opponent does here. So they're definitely going to clear one of these. But with our turn 7 play, we're going to leave them with 3 health. And they do need to clear the rest of the board, so we're definitely in a very positive spot. Leaving our opponent with just the 2 health. Frontline Cavalier, not a bad option, but certainly not the best. It does put them just out of range for the moment, at least as far as on board goes. But as soon as we add our Omen of Craving, again, that will be 6 damage because the +2 plus the previous Silver play, giving us that extra ping, will end up closing out this game for exactly 6, so couldn't go much better there. And now Bloodcraft making its way into the fray. Medusa leader, one of the few other leaders I wouldn't mind. Blood honestly has some of my favourite leader cards. I actually don't think there's any that I don't like, except maybe the Fate. I don't really go much on the Fate leader for Blood, but I think every other leader I actually don't mind. I'm actually quite a big fan of all the Blood leaders. So we've got a nice start off with this Hamelin play, setting ourselves up for a pretty reasonable turn 4. Of course, our turn 3 is nearly 100% going to be a Sylvia play. There is no reason not to play that against Blood. It's actually a very beneficial card to use in that situation, as it does become very easy to take full advantage of it and get those pings in to really hurt the Blood player in the long term. So probably some form of Hamlin, Puppet, or Flower Doll combination next turn is going to be the most beneficial to us if we don't draw anything better. Or maybe even a Loco. It's really just going to depend on how we wanted to play this matchup. I did decide to take the Loco. I think mainly because I wanted to aim to remove the Florist. That was kind of what I was thinking at the time. Although I do think maybe Flower Doll could have had a little bit more utility in the long run, but Loco should do the job pretty nicely at least. I didn't even think of Vera at the time when I was going for those Locos, but thinking back on it, it definitely was a good decision. Being able to get rid of Vera is going to make a huge difference. Just in the amount of face damage we can get alone really is going to help us out. I did want to avoid an Evo as much as possible though. At least an Evo that was going to affect the board. If I can get face damage, I don't mind quite as much. So 4 damage to the face, leaving our opponent on 9. That's pretty decent. Blood Pact, dropping them further. And they're giving up at that point, obviously not able to completely wipe this board in an effective way, and leaving themselves with 2 little health. So this deck is certainly an underdog deck. It's a lot of fun, not super expensive I suppose, or well, actually looking on it I guess it is kind of expensive. I mean, we've got way more legendaries than we probably need. I mean, we got 15 of them in this deck, so I suppose that is a little expensive when I look at it like this. I mean, you could probably get away with cutting a few legendaries here. I mean, Omen of Craving, I wouldn't want to cut it. It definitely makes this deck optimal, but there are certainly ways you could cut things down, like cut down to 2 puppets, 2 Puppeteer. Yeah, I think 3 Sylvia is pretty much mandatory, and 3 Omen of Destruction. Maybe you could get away with 1 Craving, 2 Craving, and put in some replacements for those in either Puppet support or just purely draw support. But other than that, this deck runs quite well as it is. It seems to do quite nicely in the current meta, although I haven't had a lot of tests against actual top-end meta decks, as I just got a little unlucky with my RNG over a few games, and it really wasn't worth pushing this deck much further because I'd already got the feel for it and was able to show it off to you guys as it performs. It's really just that Omen of Destruction works out as a long-term win, which doesn't do great against Mysteria. Dragon, on the other hand, can do quite well, I guess, so that's not a bad trade-off, but still quite a fun deck. And if you guys are interested, of course, I'll leave the link to this deck in the description below. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe while you're down there for more content, and until next time, see ya.